The air in Seville was thick with smoke. On a raised platform before thousands of eyes, a woman stood bound to the stake. Her name was María de Bohorques, a widow, a mother, a reader of forbidden words. The flames crept slowly upward, licking her robe painted with yellow and red tongues of fire. Her voice, hoarse from days of torment, carried across the square. "I'd die for reading words that men feared I might understand." That sentence was more dangerous than any weapon, more dangerous than armies. For Maria was not alone. Across Spain, countless women had been dragged from their homes, accused of heresy, witchcraft, or simply curiosity. And the machine that consumed them was called the Holy Office of the Inquisition. It promised salvation, but its tools were fire, iron, and rope. Its prisons echoed with screams, and its victims were often women like Maria, educated enough to question, strong enough to endure, but powerless before men who saw their silence as obedience and their pain as proof of sin. This is not just Maria's story. It is the story of a system that turned faith into fear, justice into terror, and women into fuel for its flames. Tonight, we step inside the chambers of the Spanish Inquisition, and we walk with Maria into the darkness. The Spanish Inquisition was born in 1478 under the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella. Its purpose, they said, was to guard the faith, to root out heresy, protect unity, and save souls. But from the beginning, it was more than religion. It was power. Across Spain, whispers of fear traveled faster than sermons. The Inquisition did not knock at your door in daylight. It arrived at night. Cloaked men, iron keys, a sealed warrant. No trial by jury, no chance to prepare. A neighbor's suspicion, a servant's rumor, a jealous rival's word could condemn you. And once the Inquisition named you guilty, the verdict was already sealed. For women, the danger was doubled. The law already placed them beneath men. Their voices carried little weight in court. Their very nature, priests claimed, was prone to weakness and temptation. "Woman is the doorway of the devil," wrote the theologians. And the Inquisition enforced that belief with iron. Charges against men often centered on doctrine or politics. Charges against women were different. A mother who lost a child might be accused of poisoning her own milk. A midwife who used herbs could be labeled a witch. A widow who read scripture without permission was guilty of heresy, pride, and lust all at once. When I was a child, I believed learning was holy. My husband, God rest him, never forbade my reading. I read the Gospels in our own tongue, and I felt closer to God than ever before. How could such words be dangerous? How could knowledge be sin? But to the Inquisition, knowledge in the hands of a woman was not just dangerous. It was rebellion. Education gave voice. Voice gave doubt. And doubt was heresy. By the mid-1500s, Spain had built a vast network of tribunals in Seville, Toledo, Granada, Valencia, and beyond, each staffed by inquisitors, scribes, confessors, guards, each armed with secret prisons, torture chambers, and execution scaffolds, a machine that devoured human lives and fed off their property. And always beneath its black robes, the Inquisition carried a special cruelty for women. Their bodies became battlegrounds. Their silence was forced not only by iron chains, but by shame, humiliation, and the stripping away of dignity. María de Bohorques was only one name among thousands, but through her story, we glimpse them all. Before the fire, before the ropes and iron, María de Bohorques lived a life many would call ordinary. She was a widow, left to raise her children with only memory to fill the place at her table. Her home in Seville was modest, yet filled with warmth. The smell of bread rising in the kitchen, the laughter of children running across worn wooden floors, the flicker of candlelight on the pages of books. Books. That was Maria's quiet rebellion. In an age when women were told to learn only prayers and household duties, Maria read far more. She read the Psalms in her own tongue, studied letters from distant lands, even gathered scraps of forbidden translations passed hand to hand in whispers. To Maria, the written word was not sin, it was freedom. When I read, I hear more than voices. I hear God speaking to me, not through Latin, locked away for priests, but in words I understand. My children ask me to read aloud, and I tell them stories of David and Ruth. I want them to know faith is not fear, that truth is not chained in a single tongue. In her neighborhood, Maria's learning was both admired and feared. Some women came to her for counsel, asking her to read letters or guide them in prayer. Others whispered that she was too bold, too curious, too dangerous. For in 16th century Spain, a woman who read too much was not simply seen as clever. She was seen as unnatural, and the unnatural, in the eyes of the church, was the devil's domain. Yet Maria carried on. She taught her children by candlelight. She guarded her husband's memory in silence. She lived as if knowledge itself were a kind of prayer. But in Seville, the Inquisition's shadow fell long and dark. Informants were paid in coin or absolution. Neighbors turned against neighbors. A single word could condemn. And soon Maria's books, her voice, her defiance would bring that shadow crashing down upon her home. I never thought they would come for me. I was only reading, only teaching my children. What harm could there be in understanding God? But in the eyes of the Inquisition, understanding was the greatest crime of all. They came at dawn, cloaked figures, armed guards, the thud of fists upon her door. Her children startled awake as boots stormed across the floor. Maria was seized, her arms bound, her books scattered, pages torn, some trampled beneath muddy feet. Outside, neighbors gathered in silence. Some looked away. Others whispered. A few smirked, relieved it was not their turn. Dragged into the street, Maria felt the eyes upon her like daggers. But worse than the shame was the fear in her children's faces, pressed against the window, watching their mother taken. "Do not be afraid," she wanted to call out. "I will return." But the words caught in her throat, for she knew she might never see them again. The prison was stone and shadow, a narrow cell, damp and cold, its walls carved with scratches left by others who had waited here. Names, prayers, pleas, all etched into the silence. At first, the interrogations were words, questions wrapped in accusation. Who gave you these books? Who taught you to read them? Did you conspire with heretics? Did you share forbidden teachings with others? I only read for myself, for my children. I sought only God's truth. But truth was not what they sought. They wanted confession. They wanted names. Days blurred into nights. Hunger gnawed. Thirst burned. Her children's faces haunted her. And then came the moment she had dreaded, the order for torture. They called it the strappado. Maria's wrists were bound tightly behind her back. A rope was fastened, pulled through a pulley high above. Slowly, her body was hoisted into the air, arms twisted unnaturally, shoulders wrenching from their sockets. She hung there, suspended in agony. "Confess," the Inquisitor's voice echoed. "Confess, and this will end." Her vision blurred, her body screamed. Still, she whispered, "I have nothing to confess." The rope was cut loose. She plummeted only to be stopped inches from the ground by a violent jerk that tore muscle and bone. Screams filled the chamber, but the scribes wrote calmly, as if recording numbers, not pain. And this was only the beginning. They called one device the spider, a cruel instrument, its sharp hooks designed for tearing flesh, for humiliating women in ways words can barely speak. To the Inquisitors, her womanhood itself was suspect, and so they turned her body into a battlefield. Another was the rack. Maria was strapped down, wrists and ankles tied to rollers. Slowly the wheels turned, stretching her body until joints cracked, tendons strained, bones threatened to split. Her cries rose, then broke into sobs. "Name your accomplices," they demanded. "Tell us who else reads. Tell us who else believes." But Maria knew the price of betrayal. To speak a name was to condemn another, and so she endured. Sometimes they forced water down her throat until she felt herself drowning. Other times they sat her upon jagged iron or tore her with instruments too cruel to name. Each torment was masked as mercy, designed to save her soul. Yet even in the blackest moment, she clung to fragments of faith. "Lord, see me. If I must suffer, let it not be in vain." At last, broken and battered, Maria was led not to freedom, but to spectacle. For the Inquisition did not hide its punishments. It displayed them. It made theater of suffering. On the day of her execution, Maria was paraded through the streets. She wore a garment painted with flames, a mocking preview of her fate. Crowds lined the roads, some jeering, some silent, some weeping in secret. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, asking what crime this woman had committed. She defied the church, was the answer. But Maria knew the truth. Her only crime was understanding. At the square, the stake awaited. Her hands were bound, the wood stacked high. Torches flickered. The crowd hushed. One final time, the inquisitors demanded her confession. One final chance to beg forgiveness, to renounce her words. Instead, Maria lifted her head and spoke. "I die for reading words that men feared I might understand." The flames rose. Smoke choked the air. And in that moment, Maria's voice was silenced, but her defiance became immortal. Maria's name faded from records, buried beneath ink and ash. Yet she was never truly alone. Thousands of women across Spain shared her fate. Midwives, healers, widows, mothers, daughters. Their names were lost, their stories erased, their pain written off as justice. The Inquisition claimed it acted in God's name, but history remembers it for what it was: a weapon of fear, wielded against the vulnerable, a cage for the curious, and a pyre for the brave. And even now, centuries later, Maria's final words still burn against the silence. "I die for reading words that men feared I might understand."